There was once a place at the top of the world where maps began to fail. Not end, fail. Where ink dissolved into whiteness, where coastlines blurred into rumor, where coordinates lost meaning, and even the compass seemed to hesitate, as if the earth itself resisted being measured. The ancients called it Thule, a name spoken in the same breath as distance, fear, and awe. A land beyond Britain, beyond the known sea, beyond the final certainty of civilization. To Rome, it became Ultima Thule, the last horizon, the farthest edge, the final place before the world surrendered to mystery. But Thule was never just an island. It was a wound in the map, a white scar at the crown of the earth, a place where day did not fully die and night did not fully arrive. Imagine it, a ship made of timber and rope, no engine, no radar, no rescue, only a sail shuddering under a northern wind so cold it feels sharpened, only black water, only fog, only the sound of wood groaning like old bones under strain. The air cuts the inside of your nose, salt dries on cracked lips, your hands are raw, your knuckles split, your cloak is wet, heavy, and never warms. The cold does not touch you, it enters you. And somewhere ahead, beyond the mist, beyond the heaving dark, lies a shore no one can describe without sounding mad. A land where the sun refuses to set, a land where the sea begins to freeze without becoming solid, a land some believed was not the end of the world, but the gate to another one. Because in later imagination, Thule became more than the final island of the north. It became a threshold, the last known place before Hyperborea, before the hidden polar realm, before the dark northern axis where myth would one day place Rupes Nigra, the black mountain at the roof of the earth. Was it real? Was it memory? Was it geography? Or was it humanity's first glimpse of the fact that the world is always larger than the map pretending to contain it? At the top of the world, mystery took a name. That name was Thule. And once you hear it, how do you not follow it? Before Thule became legend, it was a report. And before it was a report, it was a voyage. The story begins in Massalia, modern Marseille, in the late 4th century before Common Era. A port city alive with commerce, masts swaying in harbor light, fish rotting in baskets, smoke curling over sunburnt stone, merchants shouting over cargo, bronze clinking, ropes snapping in the wind. A civilized place, a measured place, a place that believed the world could be counted, traded, and understood. And from that place came a man named Pytheas, not a myth maker, not a priest, not a drunken teller of northern fantasies, a navigator, an observer, a man who studied the sky. That matters, because what came next was not born as a fairy tale. It began as an attempt to describe reality. Around 325 before Common Era, Pytheas sailed north, past familiar waters, past the ordinary world, past Britain, and, according to later accounts, beyond it. His original text is lost, gone, burned by time, neglect, and centuries of indifference. So we do not hear his voice directly. We hear fragments, quotes, mockery, suspicion, echoes preserved by men who often did not believe him. And maybe that is fitting, because that is what happens when someone returns from the edge with news too strange for comfort. The world listens, then laughs, then argues, then remembers. Think about what it meant to leave Massalia behind. The warm Mediterranean light fades, the water changes color, the wind hardens, the sky grows pale and severe. The farther north you go, the less human the world begins to feel. No harbors, no familiar stars, no certainty that the next horizon contains anything but more emptiness. Why did he go? For trade? For science? For fame? Maybe, but all great journeys eventually become something else. They begin in calculation and end in confrontation, because sooner or later every explorer meets the same thing. Not a new land, but the limits of what the old world was willing to believe. Pytheas did not just sail north, he sailed beyond permission. And what happens when truth comes back wearing the face of impossibility?
The most famous clue about Thule is brutally simple. 6 days north of Britain. That was the line. 6 days. Today it sounds like a distance. Back then it was exposure. It was hunger. It was sleeplessness. It was wet wood, failing light, stiff fingers, and men staring too long into fog because they were afraid to look away. 6 days in an ancient ship is not measured in miles. It is measured in surface level. 6 days of cold settling into the joints. 6 days of salt grinding into torn skin. 6 days of listening to the sea strike the hull again and again and again, until sound itself becomes punishment. And then came the impossible part. Ancient accounts say that near Thule, in summer, night nearly vanished. The sun did not properly set. To a Mediterranean mind, that was more than strange. That was destabilizing. A place where midnight still glowed. A place where darkness weakened but never arrived. A place where time seemed to malfunction. That is not a destination. That is a fracture in reality. Picture it. The horizon is washed in pale metal light. The sky is too bright to be night, too dead to be day. The sea reflects a silver bruise. Faces aboard ship look hollow, sick and sleepless. No one speaks much. There is nothing left to say. The birds still cry. The ropes still strain. The deck is slick underfoot. But the world has changed its rules. Evening does not close. Morning does not begin. You are trapped inside a permanent twilight where time itself feels cold. That is why Thule endured in memory. Not because it was distant, because it was different. Its distance altered light. Its latitude altered time. Its existence suggested that beyond the familiar world, nature itself began to behave like myth. And that is where the imagination opened. If such a land existed, what lay beyond it? Beyond the final island, perhaps Hyperborea. Beyond Hyperborea, perhaps the invisible polar mysteries. And deeper still, in the later dark architecture of northern legend, the shadow of Rupes Nigra, black, magnetic, waiting at the axis of dream and dread. 6 days north of Britain. A sentence cold enough to survive millennia. Distance became fear. Fear became myth. And how far does a man sail before the world stops making sense?
Then came the sea, that was no longer sea. Ancient writers preserved one of the most disturbing details of all. Near Thule, or beyond it, the ocean changed. Not into land, not into proper ice, into something worse. A half-living mass, a suffocating mixture of water, slush, vapor, and freezing matter. A place where the sea no longer flowed cleanly beneath the hull, but resisted, thickened, seized. Imagine the sound. Not waves, not ordinary ice, but pressure, grinding, a slow violence, a deep cracking force moving under the skin of the world. Now take that farther. Imagine the sound of a continent snapping, the thunderous fracture of ice shelves the size of countries collapsing into a warming sea. Imagine white cliffs of ice breaking apart like cathedrals under stress. Imagine the earth groaning in frequencies too low for language. That is the kind of terror this image carries. And now make it ancient. No science, no polar terminology, no climate model, no satellite image. Only men in a wooden ship, feeling the ocean lose its nature beneath them. The bow scrapes against floating crust. Oars drag like they are moving through blood and broken glass. The air tears moisture out of the lungs. Breath rises in frantic white bursts. Fingers stop obeying. The face burns, then goes numb. Skin cracks at the lips. Frost gathers in eyelashes. Inside the chest, fear becomes physical. The body knows before the mind does. This place does not want you here. The sea is no longer passage, it is refusal. And perhaps that is why so many doubted Pytheas, because the first witness to a new kind of reality always sounds like a liar to those who stayed inside safer weather. But there is something in this description that refuses to feel invented. It is too tactile, too awkward, too bodily. Fantasy tends to be smooth. Truth usually arrives covered in friction. You can feel it here. The aching jaw from cold, the sting of salt in split skin, the hollow terror of hearing the world change shape around you. At that moment, Thule stops being an island. It becomes a boundary event. A place where the familiar elements lose their identities, a threshold where water, air, land, and fear begin to merge. And once the sea itself becomes unstable, what kind of world begins beyond it? The ocean became a warning, and the warning had a name. If nature itself starts resisting you, is that discovery or judgment?
So where was it? This question has survived for more than 2,000 years because every answer feels close and wrong. Was Thule, Iceland, a volcanic wound of black rock, white ice, steam, and storm? Was it Norway, a jagged coast of fjords, pale nights, and northern seas severe enough to break southern assumptions? The Faroe Islands, Shetland, Orkney, northern Scotland. Each possibility catches the light for a moment. Each one throws a shadow. Iceland has the drama. It looks like a place born from myth and unfinished by God. Basalt cliffs, roaring surf, ash-dark earth, glacial breath, a landscape that feels less inhabited than summoned. Norway has the logic. Its coast could appear island-like from the sea. Its northern latitudes fit the strange summer light. Its surrounding waters fit the harshness of the old reports. The Faroes have the mood, remote, wind-beaten, green cliffs hanging over black Atlantic depth like the last wet steps before emptiness. And maybe that uncertainty is the point. Maybe Thule was one place. Maybe it was several places layered together by memory, error, and repetition. Maybe the name drifted north with every generation that needed a farther edge. Because the horizon is never fixed. The moment one frontier becomes known, the imagination pushes beyond it. So perhaps the better question is not, where was Thule? Perhaps it is, what did the world need Thule to be? A final island, a northern wound, a named threshold before the unnamed began. And from there the myths gathered. Beyond Thule, Hyperborea. Beyond Hyperborea, the silent architecture of the polar unknown. And at the frozen heart of later imagination, Rupes Nigra, the black northern mountain, an impossible axis around which fear and fascination turned. A location can be solved, a symbol cannot. That is why Thule survives, because geography ages, but hunger does not. The map wants an answer, the myth wants a door. And which one do you trust when the world grows dark?
This is where Thule stops being a place and becomes machinery for the imagination. Because later minds did not leave it alone. They turned it into a threshold. The last island before Hyperborea. The last human shore before the hidden north. The last credible name before the beginning of beautiful impossibilities. This is how myth works. It does not appear from nowhere. It builds outward from the edge of the believable. First, there is a voyage, then a report, then doubt, then repetition, then symbol, then a gate opens. Thule became that gate. If there was truly a land where the sun did not behave normally, where the sea thickened into resistance, where ordinary geography began to fail, then surely it made sense to place something beyond it. A purer land, a forbidden land, a sacred land, a dead land. Hyperborea entered that space perfectly, not just as a location, but as an answer to a human need, the need to believe that beyond the hardest journey, beyond the last cold shore, beyond the final boundary of ordinary life, something greater waits. And once that thought takes hold, it keeps growing darker and more elaborate. The north becomes more than north. It becomes elevation, isolation, purity, threat, the axis of hidden power. From Thule to Hyperborea, from Hyperborea to the polar abyss, from the polar abyss to Rupes Nigra, black and magnetic, standing in later imagination like a shard driven through the skull of the world. Did it exist? Maybe not. Did it matter? Absolutely. Because the human mind does not stop at the horizon, it breeds another one behind it. We do not discover limits, we weaponize them into stories. Thule was not merely the end of the known world. It was the beginning of everything projected onto the unknown. And what is more dangerous than a doorway no one can close? The Romans gave it a final transformation. Ultima Thule. A phrase cold enough to outlive empires. With that, Thule ceased to belong only to explorers. It entered language, literature, philosophy, longing. It became the phrase for the farthest place imaginable, the limit, the unreachable edge, the last point before human certainty falls away. That is how a real place becomes immortal, not through conquest, not through monuments, but through metaphor. Someone sees it, others deny it, writers repeat it, dreamers intensify it, and slowly the name detaches from soil and enters the bloodstream of culture. Thule became the word for every final frontier. For the ancients, the far north. For medieval minds, the hidden polar secrets. For later centuries, the margins of exploration. For us, maybe the deep ocean, maybe the outer planets, maybe the black fields of deep space where light arrives already ancient. Every era needs a Thule, a place that says, "You are not finished. The world is not exhausted. There is still something beyond your systems." Listen to the phrase, Ultima Thule. It does not sound like a destination. It sounds like a verdict. A place where comfort fails, where explanation weakens, where human beings are reduced to the scale they truly occupy. That is why it still matters. Because a civilization without a far horizon begins to rot inside its own certainty. Thule survived because it remained useful, not as an answer, as a wound. Thule stopped being a location. It became a direction of human hunger. And what happens to us when there is nothing left we are afraid to approach?
Forget the scholars. Forget the arguments. Forget the maps laid flat under warm light centuries later. What did it feel like to stand there? The ship is small, too small for the size of what surrounds it. Everything is damp. Everything smells of salt, smoke, rope, wet wool, and men who have been cold too long. Sleep comes in fragments. Muscles twitch even at rest. The body is always bracing, always adjusting, always enduring. Hands ache, back aches, eyes ache. The teeth chatter until the jaw hurts. Even silence becomes exhausting. Then the world changes around you. The sky does not darken properly. The horizon glows like a blade wrapped in fog. The sea looks metallic, diseased, almost sentient. Birds wheel overhead, vanishing into mist like scraps of torn omen. Then land, perhaps. A dark line, a shape inside pale void. Black rock, snow streaks, cliffs wet with spray. A coast that does not welcome, a shore that does not explain itself. The smell reaches you first. Kelp, wet stone, peat, cold earth. The waves strike hard. The wind strips heat straight through the body. And in that moment, you understand something civilization tends to forget. Discovery is not triumph. It is exposure. It is standing in the presence of something larger than your language, your courage, your categories. It is realizing that the earth is not scenery. It is not backdrop. It is not yours. That is why Thule endured. Not because it became powerful, because it made people feel powerless in the most unforgettable way. At the edge of the known world, the mind shrinks, the body listens, the soul goes quiet. The map ends, and humility begins. What kind of truth waits in places that do not care whether you understand them? Why does this story still breathe? Because Thule is not about one island. It is about the collision between what is known and what is real.
Pytheas returned with a report, but what he really brought back was pressure. Pressure on accepted reality, pressure on inherited geography, pressure on the old belief that the world ended where the familiar ended. That pressure never disappeared. Scientists still face it. Explorers still face it. Anyone who pushes against the boundary of the explainable still faces it. The instruments changed, the setting changed, the fear did not. We still stare into things we cannot fully comprehend. Deep ocean trenches, radio bursts from deep space, black holes inferred from absence, planetary ice, alien chemistry, the first light of the universe stretched thin across cosmic time. And in our private lives we meet it too, in illness, in grief, in risk, in decisions that erase the old map of who we thought we were. That is why Thule remains useful, because it names the oldest human experience, the moment you reach the border of certainty and realize the border is not protecting you anymore. More than 2 millennia later, we are still standing where Pytheas stood. He looked into polar fog. We look into machine-lit darkness. He listened to ice and sea losing their form. We listen to signals from depths no human body will ever enter. Same instinct, same shiver, same pull. The frontier changed costume, the hunger did not. And if we still feel it, doesn't that mean Thule was never left behind? Not ancient wood, not sails, not gulls over a Greek harbor. A modern figure stands alone in darkness, maybe on a rooftop above a sleeping city, maybe on a frozen shore beneath a dead winter sky, maybe in a control room washed in the cold light of monitors. No waves, only data. No mast, only signal. On the screen, deep space coordinates, spectral lines, background noise from the ancient universe. A pattern so distant its light began traveling before history had a name. The figure stares, silent. And in that silence, the centuries collapse. Because once, Pytheas stood at the railing of a ship looking into northern mist, trying to decide whether the world truly ended ahead of him, or whether it only became stranger. And now we stand before the black ocean of space, asking the same question in another form. He looked toward Thule. We look toward the dark. He searched for the edge of the world. We search for the edge of reality. The tools changed. The scale changed. The abyss changed. The hunger did not. That hunger is older than empires, older than science, older than language polished enough to hide fear. It is the instinct that drags the eye toward the final horizon, toward Thule, toward Hyperborea, toward Rupes Nigra, toward the cold mathematics of dead stars, toward whatever still waits where knowledge thins out and courage becomes the only instrument left. That is why Thule matters, because Thule is not only a place, it is the name we give to whatever waits just beyond certainty, the last border, the last silence, the last question, the place where knowledge ends and something older begins. Thule was the edge of the ancient world and the mirror of our modern one. So when you reach the last horizon, when the map fades, when the compass hesitates, when the dark looks back at you, do you turn back or do you keep sailing?